This video we're going to look at resource planning. Now you'll recall, hopefully you recognize these bits here, which are part of the time planning process. Once you've estimated the resources, you now need to figure out how you're going to get them, what resources exactly you're going to need, and how you're actually going to obtain them. Now, resource planning and resource and procurement planning are closely related. They just relate to how you're going to get it. So resource planning relates to internal resources, how you're going to obtain them internally. Procurement planning is how you're going to procure them. So these two things are both related to we need resources, how are we going to get them? Well, we either got them sitting in our own organization, or we need to go out and procure them from other organizations external to our organization. So really these two, it's a bit artificial having them as separate knowledge areas because in my view they're pretty well so closely related they should really be just one item. But we will address them separately the way PMBOK does. So looking at what are resources for a construction project: plant, human resources, people, materials. Then you've got equipment, such as hard hats, wheelbarrows, all that sort of stuff. Consumption resources such as water and electricity, if you need it. Temporary facilities, the portaloos, the mobile offices, and also scaffolding as well. Now, in PMBOK, they just talk about human resources. So you'll see that the knowledge area for PMBOK is just human resources. But, and for most projects that PMBOK covers, that is all that's relevant. So if you're looking at a project to produce a new computer program or improve services or something like that, your main resource, the overwhelmingly predominant resource, is people. So you're just managing people. You might be getting a little bit of equipment or something like that, and a little bit of materials, but really it's all about people. So that's why PMBOK just concentrates on human resources. But when we're looking at construction projects, if you had a look at the construction version of PMBOK, it talks about all resources. So we need to widen our view of resources from people, which is sort of what PMBOK, the generic version of PMBOK, sort of concentrates on, to plant and materials. Rule of thumb: costs usually about a third plant and equipment, about a third people, and about a third materials. Now that's going to vary quite a bit, but what that shows is that each one of these things is dominant, has a significant impact on the costs and the planning of the project. So for a construction project, we have to consider all three. So that's why that's not that we differ from the generic PMBOK. Now the resource management plan addresses how we're going to manage these resources. So how we're going to acquire them. Are we going to acquire them internally or procurement? So you can see procurement sort of comes into that quite a bit. How we're going to get them to site, if they're materials or if they're big bits of plant. How we're going to unload them. So if you've got a whole lot of pipes coming to site, how are you going to get them off the truck? Where are you going to store them? How are you going to make them secure? Make sure that they're not going to get vandalised or stolen. And if we talk about temporary things or we're talking about waste, how are you going to remove that off site? So that's what the resource management plan does. It sets out a plan for how we're going to manage these resources, right from getting them to site, having them on site, and using them on site. And another important aspect of resource management planning or resource planning is when we're going to use them. When do we need them on site? And so this thing here, a resource histogram, that's a resource graph actually, shows the timing of the main resource use. Usually just plant and people. With materials, we're not too worried about it because we know that we can just, we'll need to order it and we just go and pick it up when we need it. But things like the time-related things such as plant and people, we need to plan for when they're going to be on our site, when they're not going to be on our site. So that's what this resource sheet actually shows. And it's quite important that you consider the wise use of resources as well. So when the resources are on your site, these time-related ones, if materials are on site it's not so important. They just sit there, they're not gathering up money. But with these time-related ones, if they're on your site, they are being charged to you, so they're costing you money. So for example, you got a bulldozer here for just 1 week out of 4 in January. So for 3 weeks out of the 4, it's not being properly used. So you sort of might be looking at that and saying, well, wait a minute, we're not using this very well. This crane, you're there for 1 week in March, 1 week in April, then you really start using it towards the end. So you might start looking at that and saying, well, the cranes are really expensive, and in three weeks out of the 4 in that month of March, it's actually not going to be doing anything. Can we do something different? Um, so here it looks like there's different several dump trucks and stuff like that. So once again, you're looking at not just when the resources are coming, when they're being used, but also how wisely they're being used. Are they being fully utilised when they're actually on site and costing you money? Which is quite an important thing to consider.